Shalom, my friends. Welcome. I wanted to get back into Story Saturday, especially for the next game that I'm going to be playing. It does cover kind of some classic Nancy Drew books. Right now, I have my books out on loan, so I'm using a Kindle. And I would like to read The Mystery at Lilac Inn. That's the fourth book of the Nancy Drew mystery stories that I know of. From the beginning when they were first created by Carolyn Keene. Not her name. If you don't know that, that's for another day. But if you'd like to go ahead and listen, feel free to like and subscribe. I would appreciate it. I am working on getting better at a routine and scheduling, and happy holidays. So, The Mystery at Lilac Inn, Kindle edition. Alright, Chapter 1, Mysterious Canoe Mishap. Just a disclaimer, I yawn a lot when I'm reading, and I am working on maybe going to sleep, but we'll see. Alright, Chapter 1, Mysterious Canoe Mishap. Nancy Drew, how did you and Helen paddle that canoe up here so fast from River Heights? Cried Doris Drake in astonishment. Nancy, an attractive Titan blonde, grinned up at her friend. Doris was weeding a flower garden at her home along the river lake. How do you know? When we left home, Nancy's blue eyes twinkled. So recap, if you are familiar with the games that I play, you're probably wondering, who is Helen? Helen was Nancy's friend, one of her BFFs for a while. Bess and George do come in later in the books. Just right now, Helen is her BFF. So, let's continue. My friend Phil told me. Oh gosh, sorry. Excuse me. My friend Phil told me on the phone just half an hour ago that she talked with you, Nancy, at the Elite, I guess tomato, drugstore in River Heights. Nancy looked surprised. She couldn't have. Helen and I were on our way here at that time. Slender, pretty Helen Corning, 3 years older than Nancy, frowned. You must have a double, Nancy. Better watch out. I can't understand it, Nancy murmured. You say Phil talked to her, and she didn't say it was a mistake? That's right, Nancy, said Doris, but Phil was wrong, of course. After all, she doesn't know you terribly well. Say, where are you and Helen going? To visit overnight with Emily Willoughby and her aunt at Lilac Inn. They're family friends. Emily and her fiancé, we've never met him, have bought the inn, and Em tells me plan to run it full time. Can you imagine just deciding that you're going to run an inn, you're getting married, and then you're like, by the way, we're going to run an inn? I think that would be so much pressure, planning a wedding already, but maybe this is the thing that you do back in the 1930s. When this book is made, you need a good career, things aren't going that well. We'll see. Anyways, Em tells me I plan to run it full time. Helen added, Nancy and I are to be Emily's bridesmaids. We'll talk over wedding plans. How wonderful, Doris exclaimed. Nancy and Helen said goodbye and paddled off upstream. The Angus River, a tributary of Muskoka, was banked on either side with dense shrubbery, willow trees, and wild flowers. I love that. And swipe. We're almost to Benton, Nancy said. The old inn should be just beyond the next bend. The next second, something rammed the canoe violently. The impact capsized the craft, hurling Nancy and Helen into the chilly May water. Fortunately, the girls were undeterred. Each instinctively grabbed her buoyant, waterproof canvas traveling bag, bobbing nearby, and swam to a grassy bank. "Woo!" said Nancy as she dropped her bag to the ground. "Are you all right, Helen?" Her friend nodded, shivering in her bedraggled shirt and slacks despite the warm sun. "What made us capsize?" Okay, I'm gonna have to look up bedraggled for next time. Writing that down. I think that just means, with context clues, that kind of ruffled and messy. And also, I'm glad they know how to swim, and how fun that, like, they get to, be on a canoe and be, on a canoe and just be like, yeah, we need to go somewhere. So that makes me think that River Heights is near water and canoeing is just one of those normal activities you do. And I mean, I've been on a canoe a couple of times and we have had it purposely capsized to learn, like safety, like you got your life jacket on and make sure that you know how to flip the canoe over, which I feel like it's a 50-50 shot. At least, when you're learning. I didn't get past a beginner learner. But yeah, here is the canoe being capsized. Oh, the glare might be horrible. Oop. Sorry if you can't see it very well. Technological difficulties. Nancy shrugged. She kicked off her moccasins and plunged into the water again to find out and to retrieve the canoe. Okay, so it went down. It was drifting upside down a short distance away. After riding the canoe, Nancy towed it to where they had overturned. She ducked her head beneath the unruffled surface, but saw nothing unusual in the 20-foot deep water. Okay, so it's clear water too. Unless, I don't know, they have magical eyes, because I cannot see anything really when I'm in lake water. That's strange, she thought. Maybe we hit a floating log. But this explanation did not fully satisfy her. Be like, fat chance. When you feel like you're like, something tells me no, but I'm trying to make myself feel better. A drifting log probably would be still in sight, and there was none. Okay, so the river doesn't move too fast. Which makes sense, because I bet they would probably never let a woman back then be like, it's not safe to be in this river. Anyways. Nancy pushed the canoe toward shore. Helen grabbed the stern and pulled the canoe far enough up the bank so the girls could examine it. To their relief, it was undamaged. "Did you see that man with the crew cut in the rowboat?" Helen asked. "No, where?" Helen pointed to a small, high dock 50 feet downstream. She said that while Nancy was swimming, the man had climbed from the water into a rowboat, glanced their way, then gone in the opposite direction. "He didn't even try to help us," Helen said indignantly. "Do you think maybe he upset our canoe?" "I don't see how he could have," Nancy smiled, "but he has upset you. Let's go." The girls stepped back into the canoe and paddled off. As they rounded the next bend, Helen cried, "There's the Lilac Inn dock!" When the canoe came abreast of the dock, Nancy secured it to a post. The girls hopped out and started up the path that led to the inn. On both sides of the path were groves of lilac trees, which displayed a profusion of blooms from creamy white to deep purple. As the girls gazed in delight, a voice called, "Nancy! Helen! I'm so glad to see you, but whatever happened?" "Emily! Pretend I'm hugging you," Nancy said with a laugh and explained their accident. Emily Willoughby, a dainty young woman, had chestnut-colored hair, set off to advantage by her white linen dress. Beside her stood a handsome, well-built man with wavy black hair. Nancy and Helen assumed the young man was her fiancé, Dick Farnham, but Emily introduced him as John McBride, an old friend of Dick's. Remember, back in the day, that's a nickname. Some people use that nickname now, but I feel like most people use it to be rude. So, there's that. Anyways, I make a lot of comments. John is going to be Dick's best man, Emily explained. John smiled cordially. Dick and I were boyhood friends in California and roommates at college. I'm an Army sergeant on a month's leave. He looked at the new arrivals with twinkling eyes like, hey, girls. Emily will tell you why I'm here, and I'm sure glad I am. Now don't go making up to my friends, John, Emily teased. Helen is engaged to Jim Archer, who has a position with an oil company overseas. And Nancy, well, she's mighty busy these days. What's that mean? Anyways, the visitors laughed as Emily added, you girls change into dry clothes at once. John carried their bags as Emily led the way along a shrubbed path, which opened onto the spacious lawn surrounding Lilac Inn. Helen and Nancy looked with admiration at the historic hotel, erected in Revolutionary times. Okay, I love that. Here are the new guest cottages, Emily said, as they reached a group of 12 trim white units, and this one is where you'll stay. She unlocked the door of the second cottage, and the friends stepped inside. John set down the bags. See you girls later, he said. As Helen admired the attractive colonial-style bedroom, Nancy noticed a look of anxiety in Emily's eyes, but the next instant it vanished. She's very good at reading cues. Nancy and Helen listened with great interest while their friends said that she and Dick were enlarging the inn. John has been a big help with our projects. Dick is in New York working on publicity for us. I'm sure Lilac Inn will be a bang-up success, Nancy told her. Oh, I hope so, Emily said. For a fleeting moment, Nancy again detected a worried look in the young woman's eyes. Why? Emily went on. You're almost the first guest in our cottage section. John was first. He's staying near you. The official opening of the inn won't be until July 1st. That is, if we can complete everything by then, she added dubiously. If your aunt is here, Em, I'd love to see her, Nancy said. Aunt Hazel's been looking forward to seeing you. I'll tell her she's arrived. Come over to the inn after you've unpacked. Dum, dum, dum. Nancy and Helen changed into pastel cotton dresses, put away the few belongings they had brought, then headed for the inn. As they walked across the lawn, they passed gardeners who were pruning trees and cultivating flower beds edged with pansies. It's perfectly beautiful here, Helen remarked. The girls went to the front of the inn, a two-story clapboard building with a one-level wing on either side. All around it were lilac trees and other flowering bushes. Nancy and Helen mounted the wide steps and entered the center hall. Its paneled walls, old staircase, and beautiful cut glass chandelier made them feel as though they had stepped back into an earlier century. The reservation desk was in an alcove off the hallway. I have a lilac drink holder. Hi, he grinned, ready for a tour of inspection. Delighted to escort you. We accept, Helen smiled, after Nancy and I say hello to Emily's Aunt Hazel. Just then, Emily entered the hall. Aunt Hazel is, busy, but she'll be free in a few minutes. In the meantime, I must speak to Mr. Daly, the former owner of Lilac Inn. He's staying to manage the dining room, which we've kept open for business. She led the girls to a narrow corridor which ran off the lobby. Why don't you two wait for Aunt Hazel and me in my office? It's the fourth door down. Nancy and Helen proceeded along the corridor. As they passed the second door, which was partially open, the girls heard a familiar voice say, I can't lend you any more money, Maud. Please don't ask me again. Before Nancy and Helen could retreat, Aunt Hazel Willoughby walked quickly from the room. She was followed by a younger woman who had an angry look on her rather pretty but petulant face. Nancy! Helen! Emily's aunt exclaimed, stopping short. How nice to see you both here. I'm so glad you can be Emily's attendants. We are too, Nancy smiled, and Helen added, Oops. Emily's going to be a lovely bride. Mrs. Willoughby, a woman of 55, beamed. White hair framed her face in soft waves, and she was impeccably groomed. You gotta look good. She introduced her companion as Mrs. Maud Potter and said that she was to be the inn's social director for the summer. That sounds exciting, said Nancy pleasantly. For a moment, Maud's eyes narrowed. Then she tossed her head. I may not be here July 1st, she exploded and walked away rapidly. The girls, somewhat taken aback, looked inquiringly at Mrs. Willoughby, because that's not polite. What just happened? The older woman, flustered, made no explanation. She excused herself and hurried after Maud. Nancy and Helen exchanged glances. What a way for a social director to act, Helen said in disgust. I wonder why the two women were quarreling about money. At that moment, Emily rejoined the girls and led them into her office. The room was cozy with a braided rug and pine furniture. The desk in front of the window was cluttered with papers. Dix, Emily laughed. Then she sobered. He is worried about finances, poor boy. So far, he hasn't been able to raise as much capital as we need, she confided. I had a hard time convincing him to agree to a certain idea of mine. Can you tell us about it? Nancy asked. Before Emily could answer, there was a cry of pain from somewhere in the garden. The three girls dashed outside through the front entrance. Apparently, one of the gardeners had stumbled into a large hole in a pathway being strewn with gravel. The man was moaning. Oh, Hank! Emily gasped. The girls hurried to his side and discovered that one of his legs had gone down through some soft earth. Pull me out, the gardener demanded. With the girls' assistance, Hank was freed. I hope your leg's not broken, Emily said solicitously. Hank shook his head. Just a bad sprain. I wasn't looking where I was going. What I can't figure out is how that hole got here. Queer things have been going on at the inn. I'm thinking of quitting. Anyhow, I'm going home now. Oh, don't quit, Emily cried. Several other gardeners had rushed up. All denied having dug the hole. Emily asked one of them, a thin, narrow-eyed young man named Gary, to drive Hank, maybe it is Gil, to drive Hank to his house. The other men returned to their work, but the girls remained at the site of the accident. Emily's face was troubled. Nancy said impulsively, Something's bothering you, Em. What is it? Emily's whispered reply astonished her friends. Dick and I seem to have a mysterious enemy. He's trying to jinx Lilac in. Dun, dun. A jinx on Lilac Inn? Nancy and Helen stared at Emily in astonishment. Tell us about it, Nancy urged her friend. Emily sighed. I will. I didn't want to worry Aunt Hazel, so I've kept my suspicions to myself. But has Aunt Hazel noticed? Possibly. The chestnut-haired girl said that 4 days ago her fiancé had left for New York. Prior to that time, everything had been running smoothly at the inn. An hour after Dick's departure, one of the waitresses had come to Emily's office to give notice. When I asked her why, she was dissatisfied. She said it was because the inn was haunted. What did she mean? Nancy asked. Emily said she had not taken the statement seriously. At the time, I was sure the waitress, Mary Mason, was just making up an excuse for leaving. She packed up and left on the bus to River Heights that day. Now I'm not so sure she hadn't seen something strange. Sunday morning, Gil Gary reported that our finest lilac tree near the front entrance had been stolen. No ghost did that. What a shame, Helen exclaimed. Mr. Daly was heartbroken, Emily said unhappily. Several years ago he rooted this lilac, the Lucy Baltet variety, with a lovely pinkish flower. It was just beginning to blossom abundantly. The third strange occurrence, Emily continued, was around 12 o'clock last night. So around midnight. I was awakened by the sound of music and traced it to our record player in the recreation room. No one was there. Perhaps someone at the inn was playing a joke, Nancy suggested. No, everyone denied this, Emily answered. A window in the recreation room was partially opened. It looked as though it had been forced, and I know all the windows had been closed earlier. There was a thoughtful silence for several seconds. Then Emily linked arms with her chums. I won't worry you with any more mystery, she said. Let's have lunch and later concentrate on wedding plans. Near the dining room door, Emily stopped to introduce her friends to a kind-faced, white-haired man. This is Mr. Daly, the former owner, whom I told you about. I just couldn't get along without him. I'm so glad he decided to stay a while, even though he wants to retire. How do you do? Nancy and Helen smiled and shook hands, then went to a corner table near an old Hutch cabinet. Nancy's mind was still on the series of events Emily had just related. It did sound as if something peculiar was going on at Lilac Inn. Nancy had learned from her lawyer father, Carson Drew, that a seemingly unrelated chain of events often became a single baffling mystery. The young sleuth had found proof of this in solving several cases herself, her first being the secret of the old clock, and more recently, the bungalow mystery. Mrs. Willoughby and John McBride joined the girls. Emily asked them where Maud was. I believe she's sunbathing on the dock, Mrs. Willoughby replied. She ate an early lunch. There was a tense note in the woman's voice, which Nancy quickly detected. The girl detective recalled the conversation she and Helen had overheard that morning. Had further trouble developed? When Anna, the waitress, brought the first course of beef broth, Emily changed the subject abruptly. Lilac Inn is really a fascinating place, she said. The original floors are still intact, and it's rumored that George Washington ate here in the stagecoach days. John smiled. According to reports, our first president must have eaten at every dining place in this country. During the luncheon of cream chicken on toast, peas salad, and iced tea, Helen asked whether Emily had a neighbor who wore his hair in a cut. She explained about the man who had rowed off. Instead of coming to the girls' rescue when their canoe capsized, Emily and her aunt shook their heads. Not a very gallant guy, John remarked. He asked several questions about the man with the crew cut and seemed very much disappointed when Helen could add nothing more to the description. He's probably wondering if he's military, since they had the haircut thing. That's what I would think. And also he's like, I want to help you. Anyways. Later, Nancy said to John, your career in the Army must be interesting. Do you have a special assignment? Wish I could tell you, Nancy, but it's classified or confidential to civilians. I understand, Nancy smiled. And it's true, like, It is. Presently she turned to Emily. I saw Doris Drake on the way here. Her house isn't far away, is it? About a mile up the road, Emily answered. After luncheon, Emily offered to show Nancy and Helen around the inn and take them on a tour of the extensive grounds. I'll get the Jeep for that trip, John offered. Emily showed her friends the parlors and writing room and the modern wing containing the pine-paneled recreation room. Very attractive, Nancy remarked. She spotted a record player in one corner. Is that the one the intruder used, Emily? Yes, and here's the window which I found forced open last night, Emily pointed out. Next, Nancy and Helen were escorted upstairs to see Emily's attractive, old-fashioned two-room suite. When the inn is ready, there'll be accommodations for 50 guests. At this instant, a piercing shriek came from the garden. The three girls dashed down the stairs and rushed outside. The cry came from near the river, said Nancy, running in that direction. John McBride and two gardeners joined them. They made a thorough search, but found no one. Emily turned to Nancy with questioning eyes. Are you thinking what I am? That the person screamed just to frighten us and make this place almost seem haunted? Yes, but why here? Is someone trying to balk your expansion program here? Nancy suggested. Possibly, but I can't figure out the reason, Emily replied. Well, I'll show you the rest of the house. She took the visitors to the far wing, where the kitchen was located. Its gleaming wall ovens and natural stone colonial fireplace, complete with spit, fascinated Nancy. Emily, you'll have no trouble filling every room in this inn, she said enthusiastically. It's absolutely charming. I hope you're right, Emily replied fervently. If only the mystery haunting this place could be solved. You'll help, Nancy? I'll certainly try, Emily. The three girls went to the parking lot, where John awaited them at the wheel of the Jeep. Hold on to your hats, he called. Oh yeah, they wear hats. His three hatless passengers grinned as they hopped into the rear seat. The vehicle shot forward and turned into a dirt lane. Soon they were driving among groves of apple and peach trees. At Emily's request, John stopped the Jeep near an apple tree. She got out to examine the leafy branches. We'll have an abundant crop this season, she commented. There are lots of tiny apples forming. John had climbed out also. Suddenly he stooped and examined the ground. What are you looking at? Nancy called to him. A big fat beetle, John laughed. Nancy chuckled, but she had the feeling that John had been evasive in his reply. Well, you know. As the Jeep started off, she looked back. There was a trail of marks leading toward the river. They looked like flipper tracks, she thought. I wonder if John made them, or if he suspects someone else did. Later, when the young people returned to the inn, they found Maud Potter on the patio. Nancy was amazed at the change in the woman's manner. Now she was smiling broadly as she waved a folded newspaper. Nancy, she cried effusively, you're a skin-diving celebrity. What do you mean? Nancy asked, puzzled, as Mrs. Willoughby joined the group. Maud opened the paper and pointed to page 1 of the River Heights Evening News. Why, Nancy Drew, Helen exclaimed, your picture in a write-up. You never breathed a word. Everyone clustered around to see the picture of Nancy in a bathing suit, diver's mask, and flippers, and the accompanying article. The caption read, Daughter of local lawyer Carson Drew learns her ABCs. C's as in the sea, S-E-A-S, and skin diving. The article went on to tell that Nancy had just completed a course in advanced skin diving in the Muskoka River and that she had finished first in total points in the 20-student group. When asked by a reporter where she hoped to practice the sport, John read aloud, Miss Drew replied she would like to skin dive in both salt and fresh water. This writer strongly suspects that there will be times when she will use her newly acquired knowledge in solving mysteries, at which Miss Drew, we understand, is proficient. With an admiring glance, John said, "Meet a fellow frogman. I practically grew up in flippers." "Really? Oh, I have a wonderful idea." Nancy said she would like to find out, if possible, what had upset her canoe so suddenly. "Maybe there is some submerged object I didn't notice. It could be a hazard to other people in boats. John, why don't you take a look underwater at that same spot?" "How about both of us going?" John suggested, smiling. Emily spoke up. "Nancy, you and Helen must stay here longer. You can work on the mystery and also go skin diving with John." Both girls accepted eagerly. "We'll paddle home tomorrow," said Nancy. "Pick up more clothes and my diving equipment, then come back." For the rest of the afternoon, the three girls discussed the subject of gowns to be worn by Emily's bridal attendants. Nancy and Helen were delighted to learn that the color was to be lilac pink. "By the way, Helen said, do you know where lilacs came from originally?" Their hostess nodded. "A German traveler brought the flower from the Orient to Europe in the 16th century. Eventually, the lilac was introduced to America." All this time, Nancy had noted that Emily was doing her best to seem cheerful, and Maud, too, continued to act carefree. Emily had arranged a steak cookout on the patio, and the social director joined in the lively banter. When they finished eating, she brought out a guitar. "How about some Western tunes?" she suggested gaily. When they talk about gaily or like feeling gay, it means happily. Back in the day, it didn't mean what it does now. "Fine, let's all sing," Helen answered. At 11 o'clock, the group said goodnight, and the River Heights girls tumbled into bed. The next morning, Nancy, who had just finished dressing when there was a knock on the cottage door. John called out, "Phone call for you, Nancy," at the desk in the lobby. "The cottage phones aren't connected yet." "Thank you." Nancy hurried to the lobby and picked up the receiver. "Hello?" "Why, Hannah, what's the trouble?" Hannah Gruen was the Drews' housekeeper and had mothered Nancy since the age of 3, when her own mother had passed away. "Oh, Nancy," Hannah sounded almost hysterical. "Come home right away. Your father isn't here, and someone broke into the house last night." Dun dun! We will pick up on another day on chapter 3. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I can't wait for you guys to learn more.